Evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to a Child's Gallery virtual artist talk with Andrew Fish as he discusses his current exhibition, Retro Pictures. My name is Richard Baiano and I'm the president of Child's Gallery. This exhibition is currently on view at the gallery, and we are open Tuesday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., Saturday through Sunday, 11 to 5. During the presentation by Andrew, I'd like to remind everyone to stay on mute, and then there will be an opportunity to have a question and answer session at the end. And I would ask that you submit your questions to the chat feed through the chat feature during the presentation, and then we'll call on individuals and read from the chat. So I'd like to give you a little bit of an introduction to both Andrew and the exhibition. So Andrew Fish is both an artist and an educator. He grew up in Vermont, studied art in New York, and settled in Boston. Retro Pictures explores Fish's upbringing, his adolescence, and adulthood as part of Generation X. Generation X members straddle the 20th and 21st centuries as analog children and digital adults. Retro Pictures is a very personal journey for Fish. It's an introspective look at events and images of the 1980s and 1990s that helped shape him, but also includes many recognizable hallmarks, icons, flashpoints of that period that speak broadly to our collective sense of memory. So with that, I would like to welcome you all and open the discussion up to Andrew. I'm going to go to the first slide and we'll let Andrew talk.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. Thank you, Richard and Stephanie and Catherine and Julie and Ren at the gallery. Also Alex and Kevin, who've helped out a lot for this show. Child's Gallery has been very generous in their openness to show my work and to give me a space to bring people together around it. So I'm very grateful for that. While we do meet in this virtual space, I want to acknowledge the native ancestral lands that lay beneath my feet here in Somerville, Mass, and also where the gallery sits in Boston. These lands were home to the Massachusetts people south of the Charles River and the Pawtuckets, who hunted and fished in present-day Somerville. Retro Pictures, the name of the exhibition, was conceived in the early spring of this year as a reaction to multiple events and ruminations in my life and what I wanted to paint at this specific point in time. I decided to look into my past to examine myself as a member of Generation X, as Richard said, approaching midlife. As an adolescent, my experiences straddled the 1980s and 1990s, going from being a teenager to a young adult, moving from Vermont to New York City, and experiencing a world that was increasingly turning from analog to digital. I was curious to revisit the events, icons, popular culture, and public figures that occupied my surroundings when I was younger. Can we get the next slide? Thanks. By retrospectively looking at certain hallmarks, flashpoints, ideas, attitudes, and products of the period in which I grew up, I began to investigate how the influence of pop culture, popular thought, and the environment around me shaped my personal experience and established my hopes, fears, perspectives, and personality traits that continue to inform the way I live in the world. I knew that in order to find the right imagery to work with, I would have to rely on other people's photographs. So I turned to the internet. And this was a new approach for sourcing imagery for me, and I welcomed the change. It meant less ambiguity and more specificity in the images and narratives, unlike my previous work. Okay, we got this slide now. Yeah, these are installation shots. If anyone's curious, if you haven't been able to come to the gallery yet, this is what the show looks like. I recalled and examined my own personal experiences, but also did a lot of research, watching hours of YouTube videos, rereading Douglas Coupland's book, Generation X, Tales for an Accelerated Culture. And I also found a great deal of inspiration in Jeff Gordonier's book, X Saves the World, How Generation X Got the Shaft, but Can Still Keep Everything from Sucking. which I think is a great subtitle. Can we get the next slide? I also wanted to explore the use of sculpture in this show, and I felt it was necessary for certain elements of my investigation. Like a pack of Desert Storm trading cards from the 1990s, or an actual BMX bicycle wheel that you see here in the foreground as one of the elements in the show. Making these sculptural objects was liberating for me as a painter and freed my mind from the confines of the rectangle, which in turn benefited the paintings that I was simultaneously making. You see the next slide? You can see the boombox in its installed place. As a result of all that, the exhibition as a whole is the work of art. There's a real life boombox playing music from the period, sculptural objects filling three-dimensional space, and pictures of people and events crowding the walls. One of my friends at the gallery referred to it as an immersive experience, which resonated with me. Some of the works in the show are lighthearted and celebrate the curiosity of my youth. Skateboarding, breakdancing, and BMX freestyle were all activities I enjoyed as a kid. I was never very good at any of it, but I loved the style, the freedom, and the subculture. Can we get the next slide, please? Other works are laden with historical references to events that left me with a range of emotions that I had to contend with as I got older. The explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger, the ACT UP AIDS awareness campaign, fall of the Berlin Wall, the Desert Storm military incursion, and the tragedy of 9/11 all had resonant effects on my psyche. Next slide, please. I ended up making so much work for this show that we literally ran out of room for everything that I wanted to include. But we're going to focus on a few artworks that should provide adequate representation for the show. So we've made a selection to talk about today. And I'll let you know a little bit about the works conceptually and thematically, but we can also talk about formal elements in the work if people want to. So let's start with the next slide. Richard, please. Okay. Here's a BMX freestyler. My life revolved around my BMX bike before I was old enough to drive. I learned tricks, I rode ramps, I lived on my bike through all seasons. I loved everything about BMX culture and was enamored by the design of the bikes and their acrobatic potential. I read the magazines, I watched the videos, and hung out with other kids who were also into BMX bikes. This painting shows the freedom of self-expression, this kind of freedom that I felt when I was doing tricks on my bike. And it has some of the usual hallmarks and the fashion and design of the activities, such as the Van sneakers and the Skyway mag wheels. See the next picture. This is titled MTV. I remember watching MTV for hours when I was growing up. It was an exciting conduit for new music and fashion. It felt so revolutionary at the time, but seemed to get worse as the years went by. It introduced reality TV to the American palate and became less about music and more about public spectacle. And it was kind of like watching counterculture turn into the establishment. But in this painting, I'm merging this idea of MTV with the ubiquitous TV cart that was wheeled into classrooms as an extension or maybe a substitution for teaching. And the cold, sterile, institutional environment of the public school hallway sets the stage for these two young kids to move this monolithic logo. This is Fallout Shelter Garfield, one of the sculptures that's in the show. It's kind of a wall piece, but also a sculpture. When I was a kid, I loved Garfield. I loved his cranky disposition and his unamused expressions. It made his smile all the more joyful. I loved his fat jokes and self-love. He's the original body positive mascot. I also related to his inner dialogue and cynicism. He seems like the perfect Gen X cat, never selling out and always challenging the status quo. In this sculpture, I've placed his signature orange and black stripes against the orange and black stripes of a nuclear fallout shelter sign to illustrate one of the ways in which my childhood innocence came to a screeching halt. Alongside blissfully ignorant childhood lurked a fear that at any moment there could be instant annihilation from nuclear war. When the TV movie The Day After aired nationwide in 1983, I was struck by the fragility of my existence on this planet, coupled with the regular air raid drills in school that put me under my desk. I had an acute feeling that the bomb could be dropped on me at any minute. This sculpture places Garfield in front of the nuclear symbol, echoing his appearance. It's a figurative and literal confrontation between innocent youth and existential angst, and a geometric composition in orange and black. You see the next slide? Like most kids in my generation, I was in front of the TV when the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster happened. The broadcasters didn't know what to say, and the eerie silence made the cloudy plumes that much more terrifying. Obviously, there's a major malfunction, is what they finally said. Now at midlife, I'm strangely attracted to the abstract form of the explosion while also recognizing the traumatic effect it had on my young mind. In this painting, a family sits around a television as the disaster is superimposed over their domestic comfort. This is jazzercise. I remember this aerobic fad had a particular look and choreography. I can still hear the music of Olivia Newton-John. As a young boy, I was enchanted by these examples of older women. They seem so modern, so liberated and powerful. The fashion of the jazzercise movement obviously predates Lululemon, but it's remarkable to see its resurgence in this century. You don't see a lot of headbands and leg warmers, but leotards have certainly evolved into yoga pants. This is Desert Storm House of Cards. We have a few views, few angles of it. In 1991, the trading card company Topps, typically known for doing sports trading cards, issued a collector's edition of Desert Storm cards to commemorate the United States military campaign in Kuwait against Iraq. It trivialized death and destruction, promoted an act of war, and heroized the soldiers and weapons involved in the campaign. Delicately balanced as a house of cards, the entire pack, complete with stickers and puzzle, because on the back of the stickers were pieces of a puzzle, is assembled here as a sculpture of twin towers, foreshadowing a retaliation from such provocations, a legacy of both Presidents H.W. and W. Bush. And you can see in the central part of the sculpture, you can see George Bush, the senior, H.W. Bush, in sort of hidden in his little bunker there. And we have Powell on the upper right and Cheney on the upper left. We lost Powell recently. Next slide, please. This is breakdance. I was fascinated by breakdancing from a very young age. The movement, music, and fashion of the art form has always been irresistibly seductive to me. I love the democratizing nature of it, and that it was often used as a nonviolent way to exercise rivalry. I think about how this form of dance wouldn't have been possible without the prevalence of the boombox. It provided a soundtrack for people to express themselves through movement in public spaces. This painting shows two dancers leaping into a chest bump, resembling the letter X, which makes me think of my own generational designation. And we see the boombox in the middle of the picture. This is the Berlin Wall. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 marked the end of the Cold War, and it ushered in the last decade of the 20th century. I was still in high school, but would graduate a year later. And for me, the act represented a hopeful respite from the constant threat of nuclear annihilation and echoed a feeling of liberation that I was anticipating by becoming an adult. And I think that might be the last painting we're looking at. And then our last slide, I think, is has the Walkman in it.
So thank you, Andrew.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back for a minute to one of the first slides of the BMX, if I could.
Mhm.
When I look at this photo, so all of you know, I am slightly older than Andrew, and so this show has had a particular resonance for me. And I was struck by something that you said, because it's something I'm interested in, which is what it means to be in our generation, which is a generation that was both analog and digital. And I spend a lot of time at the gallery learning about the different generations, because everyone approaches life differently based on what generation they're from. And with this photo, what immediately comes to mind was after school, going out and not having to come home until the streetlights came on. And that's something that today is completely an anathema to parents. So I'm just curious if you want to elaborate a little bit about your thoughts on analog versus digital.
Hmm. Yeah, I think, when I was thinking about consuming this activity as a young person, there wasn't the internet, so you couldn't look up all these great videos that are now on YouTube and these pictures of people doing these tricks. And so what you could do was find a video. You could find a VHS tape of some produced video of BMX freestyling. So I think that, we had a lot of magazines. There were magazines, BMX magazine and Freestyler magazine and things like that. And they would have these sort of sequential pictures of how to pull off a trick on your bike. And so, that I feel like that's one of the things that, if I were that age now, I would really benefit from having even more access to all of this great material that's digital. But I think, I think it's the way we consume things, and maybe not that much has changed, just the medium has changed, but I think, I think there's definitely more of it to see, which is a blessing and a curse.
So before I get into talking a little bit about your stylistic technique and process, you mentioned that you use the internet to source the images for your paintings.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how you decided which images you wanted to use and whether or not they were ubiquitous or obscure, and what sort of motivated you.
Yeah, that's a really great question. There were certain things that would come to mind. Like there's a painting of Prince in the show, and there's so many pictures of Prince that are on the internet. I mean, you can just find every angle from every concert from every period. And so it needed to resonate with me, and I was collecting tons of imagery. I was going online, I was going into these deep dive rabbit holes of just finding imagery and finding the next image and the next image. And I would save them all and save them into different folders. And then I would spend time with those folders and look at all the different images. And for me, it had to, there had to be something in the image that felt personal. And I know that sounds strange because it's not really a public domain, but in a way we all have access to the same images. And a lot of them are popular images that have been used already or that are recognizable. But I was looking for the ones that resonated with me, that felt like, yeah, that's kind of the experience that I remember having. I remember that if I were to put a visual to that experience, this is the more genuine, true, or honest one. Some of them are more sensational, more interesting, even more well-known or even more obscure. But sort of looking at investigating my own upbringing and myself, I knew I didn't have these images. I might have a few of them maybe somewhere. And you and I talked about this the other day, Richard, like, I had a 110 camera. So I'm sure I took pictures, of us, my friends and I, skateboarding or breakdancing or doing whatever, but I don't know where those pictures are. And it just, and then of course I knew I wanted to look at events like the Space Shuttle Challenger and Desert Storm and these Berlin Wall and these kinds of things. So I knew that I didn't have any of my own images of that too. So I just went wholeheartedly into internet research.
So this picture of the Star Wars opening, is this the theater in London where it premiered?
Yeah.
And did you experience a premiere like that of Star Wars?
I did not. I think I was even, I don't know. I think I first saw Star Wars at a drive-in when I was a kid. I can't remember. I just remember it being this like impactful thing. I mean, I knew about it before I even saw it. Like everybody was talking about it. It was all over, TV, everywhere. And I wanted to make a painting about Star Wars because it loomed large in my childhood. I mean, I was into all the movies. I, pretended I was a Star Wars person out in the snow or out in the woods or whatever. And but I didn't want to make a painting of any of the characters from the movie. I didn't want to take a scene from the movie. So I thought, well, what is it? What is it about Star Wars that, why is it important to me? And it was because it was just this, sort of cultural, I don't know, juggernaut. It was this huge thing that was in my life and my family. My brother, my sisters, all of our friends. So I thought that showing an example of it being that the premiere of this thing that's about to explode and sort of change film and science fiction and culture forever was more compelling as an image idea. So I was looking for one that was a crowd in front of a theater, and this was the best one that I found. And the original is in black and white, so I had to invent.
And it's interesting to me because my recollection of Star Wars is much the same, which is that it was a phenomenon. And if we look at Harry Potter now, I mean, it was the Harry Potter well before Harry Potter. I was also interested in science fiction, so it's an interesting perspective to not show the movie but show the excitement about it and how everyone would wait for it, and that the only way you could see it was in a movie theater. You couldn't see it anywhere else.
That's right.
It would never be released on TV. But how many times did you see it?
Oh my goodness, I can't remember. I mean, I think I watched it like last year. I mean, it's like I don't think a year goes by that I don't watch it. When I was a kid, I watched it. When we were able to see it on VHS, or when it was home movies, or what I mean, home video was available. We watched it a ton. I've seen it, multiple times. Me and my brother are in this picture, actually.
Really?
I put two kids in there, and one's my brother and one's me. So I made it personal.
So I should say that when Andrew was painting this exhibition, I was sending him the images that were meaningful to me, and it was funny. So what I'd like now, I'm curious if you would talk a little bit about your process. For example, the stencil patterns feature prominently. Is there a method with how you choose to work with pattern and incorporate into the painting?
Yeah, sometimes there is, and other times it's part of the process that creates an opportunity for surprise, which is important for me in my work. I don't always want to know exactly how things are going to turn out, which is we talked about sculpture before. It's one of the things about sculpture that was interesting in relation to the paintings is that the sculptures I knew exactly how I wanted them to turn out. And the paintings, I always like them to be a little more fluid. And so when it comes to the stenciling or any of the patterns or even color and form and gesture, some of the paintings, they begin as an underpainting, as an abstraction, an underpainting, and the orientation of them might change depending on what I then decide to use for imagery. For instance, there's a couple paintings in the gallery. One is of Kermit the Frog, and the other is of the Twin Towers and the band The Damned. And they're very tall, vertical paintings. They're 60 inches tall by 36 inches wide. And one of those initially was on its side and was the Star Wars painting. So that was the original canvas for the Star Wars painting. And so I created this underpainting with the patterning, with the stenciling, kind of knowing or thinking I knew that that was what it was going to be, and then changed my mind and turned it upright. And then it became that. I think that's the one that became the Kermit the Frog painting. So I like that element of surprise. And also, as I'm painting the representational imagery, the underpainting comes forward and I have to navigate, negotiate with it to figure out like what elements I let come forward and what elements I push back. And I might add more stenciling on top of that. And opposite of that is the more direct effect of using stenciling for a particular image. And the Atari picture has that in it. There's a pattern roller and some stenciling that is very deliberate. I think it's toward the beginning.
Towards the beginning.
Yeah, it's one of the install shots.
Ah, that one.
There it is. So it's right behind the house of cards. It's kind of hard to see, but there was I'd stenciled the two kids. There was a stencil all around them, and then created that band of multichromatic gradient that's behind them. And then there's these green, they almost look like old, digital video game design. This kind of like green pattern that's a bunch of little cubes. So that's a place where the patterns are very specific. And then the painting on the left, I knew the pattern that goes through the man's clothes. I knew that the figure was going to be in that position on the canvas. So I created the pattern as a vertical, knowing that the figuration was going to go over it. And some really amazing things happened as I started painting in the figure. Certain areas looked like light and shadow. There's areas of the clothing that looks like there's a sort of a crease in the pants. And in the head too, there's all these interesting things happening up in the head. So those, that was a really satisfying painting because it had the best of both of those things.
So there's an observation in the chat that I'd like to read to you and then have you comment, and then it'll bring up another topic. But it says that your show has gotten a lot of feedback on social media, and it's fascinating to see how painting and sculpture triggered individual reactions. Following the audience's comments, I had the feeling that the notion of the generational and the individual experience melted together, and I started wondering if we can tell personal and public memories apart at all. And that's from William Newser. So one of the things that, well, actually, this is going to take us in another direction. So I'll come back to this because I think the other direction will go for a while. But there was two questions. If you could explain what stenciling is and how it's done. Okay.
So I use a few different techniques with the paintings. Stenciling, I might I'll work in a layer, and I work in oil paint. They're all oil paint on linen, the paintings, except for the ones on paper. It's oil on paper. And I'll work in these layers. So I'll let a layer dry, and then to preserve elements of that layer, I will create a stencil to cover it, and then I'll paint a new layer on top, and then I'll peel away the stencil, and I'll get an effect that way. Other times I use pattern rollers that they were these rubber rollers that were made for people who couldn't spend a lot of money on wallpaper. So they would buy these rollers that had patterns on them, and they would basically paint their walls with them. And they're not that popular anymore, but I found a bunch of them, and I've been using them. So there's that sort of stenciling, patterning effect. And there's also this thing that I do in just about every painting, and I think you recognize it the more you see the work, which is Kathy Bradford is a great painter in New York and works in Maine as well, and she coined the term the figure ground reversal, and I've just been hooked on this, which is where your underpainting becomes, or whatever the element is on the bottom layer, becomes the foreground. So you're shifting the foreground and the background. And this painting on the left in this picture of the kid holding the boombox is a great example, because the clothing, basically the body form of that figure is underneath the layer that is the road and the cars and the trees and the sky. So all of that was painted over. The painter Fairfield Porter used to do that too in his landscape paintings. He would paint the sky into the tree, so he would always sort of paint the sky over the trees, and the effect is beautiful. But it's sort of an unconventional way to think about building a picture. So stenciling has been important to me in my practice because of that.
So, I mean, it's interesting because I see that technique right in this painting with the man with the boombox.
Mm-hmm.
So going from painting to sculpture, sculpture, I'm assuming this was a new thing for you, especially with found objects. So if you can share a little bit of your process with that and how you found the works that you chose, and then speak specifically about the boombox and how you curated songs to be a part of the exhibition.
Sure. Yeah. No, I've made some sculpture in the past, but never thought to show it. Never. I don't know. I just this time around, I was looking at the expression of the self, sort of investigation, and thinking about certain things that I wanted to make more physical. That's not the right way to say it, because I think the paintings are physical in their own right, but I guess taking up space differently and creating the three-dimensional experience of being able to walk around it. And so the BMX, this idea of BMX freestyle and the wheel kind of led me to think about the Duchamp piece, the ready-made of the Duchamp bicycle wheel and the stool. And so I kind of wanted to do a variation on that. And then when I was thinking about the impact of Desert Storm and how that was a part of my life, I knew people. I went to high school, a lot of people that went into this war, and I was doing a bunch of research on it, and I found that they'd made these cards. I never knew these things existed. I mean, they came out in the early 90s, and I've since sharing this piece with people on social media, I've heard stories from people that knew that had these when they were when they were kids, had these when they were out of high school, had these because they went to the war. And it kind of baffled me that I had never seen this. And I actually have the box here. This is the what they come in, and it's this sort of like Desert Storm collector series, and you see they created their own logo for it and everything. And there's no way I could have satisfied the desire to make a work of art about this with just a painting. All the imagery I thought it had to be as kind of over the top as it is. It had to, this abundance of images and the glossiness and the trivialization, this kind of logo and these icons, that these stickers. I mean, the whole thing was just it just kind of blew my mind. And thinking about it also as a house of cards, these two ideas coming together. And so it's like sculpture was necessary for that. And there's a sculpture of Macintosh computers that are stacked on top of each other with a fanny pack. It's called Fanny Pack Mac. And it's kind of a self-portrait because I worked in technology for a long time, and I wanted to create, if I'm gonna look at who I was as a person growing up, as a person who I was in the 90s, and the things that shaped me, like technology was a big part of that. So I had to decide how to do that. I made one painting of a designer, a graphic designer named Susan Kerr, but then I wanted to sort of expand on that, and sculpture seemed like the right way to do that. So I guess I just felt called to make these things in sculpture. And the boombox was
Let me go to the boombox.
Yeah, the boombox was like was kind of the first sculpture. Like I thought of this, and I think I was inspired by the space too, because this gallery has this alcove space in it already. And I thought, what a perfect thing to put in there, like a boombox that could play music from the 80s and 90s. And
So what everyone should know is that the boombox plays constantly of a curated list of songs from selected by Andrew. So can you talk a little bit about how you selected the songs?
yeah, I'm DJing this exhibition too. It's the boombox has I love this piece of equipment, and the boombox in general, boomboxes are this amazing cultural object that it had this dominance at one point, before headphones and Walkmans and iPods and everything sort of pushed it out of the way. But the boombox was a way that people could share music, record music. You'd bring a boombox anywhere and play something, and people, movement would happen around it, whether it was dance or roller skating or skateboarding or those kinds of things. And the act of sharing music and the exposure to tons of different kinds of music, depending on who had the boombox or what people were into and what they were turning other people on to. So the playlist is just a variety of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of funk and R&B and early rap, and there's punk, and there's some new wave, and there's there's not a lot of folk or country or jazz, because I wasn't into that until later. So I was just sort
And
of
not a
looking
lot
at,
of pop music either, I don't think.
there's yeah. In what way do you mean pop music?
Uh, Bubblegum pop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a generational term.
Right. Yeah, that's good to hear, actually. I'd like to think it's not just, yeah, but
Yeah.
there's a bunch of kind of silly things in there too. But it's a Spotify playlist, and I've been updating it and changing it and rearranging it, and it's plugged into the side of this boombox through an RCA cable.
So Andrew, one of the things that I'm not sure that you're aware of is that this show has really drawn a lot of a younger audience in, and people that are millennials and Gen Zs. And the interesting thing is it really resonates with them. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about that. And then I'd like to move into the broader topic and ask you what your opinion is about nostalgia relating to images.
So I think it's great that younger people are getting something out of it. It's it's interesting. I work in colleges, and I'm around a lot of younger people who I see what they're wearing for fashion and what they're listening to music and sort of logos and things that they're sporting. And there is a lot of kind of retrospective interest in the 80s and 90s. And I think that's wonderful. I mean, I to be honest, I wasn't thinking about that or going for that. And that kind of brings up something about the whole process of the show for me, which was that I didn't think about the audience as much as I normally would. It was important for me to just think about myself for this show, and what was resonating with me and what I wanted to revisit and turn into works of art and to put together, so that each one together would sort of create this whole experience. But I've been hearing a lot from people that even when I'd have a studio visit, I had some good studio visits before the show went up, and people would just right away just start telling me stories about their own experiences related to these things. And I found that really interesting, because I feel like if I had done that, if I'd really tried to appeal to younger people or even people my own generation with specific things, it might not have worked as well. I don't know. I think focusing on like what is personal and why certain imagery is used.
Well, I think that's what makes it your show, because I remember when I was sending you certain images, they were things that were clearly meaningful to me, but didn't have the same resonance, with you. but at the same time, I'm transported back into that time by a combination of obviously the work and the music. I do want to mention that you've done a number of the promotional videos using the boombox where you're recreating particular dances and feelings of the time. I mean, we should share some more of them on social media, but they really do give a sense of looking back in time from today.
Yeah, I worked with my friend Carolina Flores, who's a fantastic dancer and just brought such great energy to the project. The widescreen versions are on Facebook, and the sort of tall, narrow ones are on Instagram, but all the videos are still there to watch. And we made 4 of them in promotion to lead up to the opening of the show. And there was the music that we chose was very specific. It's from the period, even like the New Edition song. And New Edition is from Boston originally. And we filmed it at Lopresti Park, which is in East Boston, looking at the Boston skyline. So there's a lot of very intentional things happening there. But the boombox is like, the second star of the show after Carolina. And it's kind of been the object that's traveled early on in the development of this exhibition, all the way into the exhibition, and it's still cranking out tunes today.
Yeah, and we do have, in addition to Andrew's site, we have the videos on our Instagram and Facebook and Twitter as well. So I recommend that. But back to the next generations, you are an educator. So I'm curious if your role as an educator has had any influence in putting this show together.
I'm sure it has. Yeah. I think, I'm telling my students a lot of things, and I have to be, honest if I'm adhering to those things as well. And I think that I think it makes me a better educator when I am more self-actualized in my own life and in my own work, and then letting those boundaries between life and work sort of blur, so that you're all just kind of you're having one experience. And so I'm drawing that out in my students as well. And it's interesting. I had some former students come visit me at the studio as I was working on this work, and had some really great conversations about it. So I feel like that already, my community is expanding because of my work in schools. And then also I'm just I'm attuned and aware of like what's going on. I've got all these young artists that are bringing in all these ideas and interesting energy into the studio classroom, and we're having conversations about what they're interested in. And then it's making me think about what I'm really interested in, and then sort of honoring what they're interested in, and not just sort of trying to paste over that what I'm interested in or what I think they should be interested in. So I do think working in schools, being an educator, working in arts education has been really beneficial to my practice as an artist.
So do you have more paintings in your head from this body of work that you didn't get to do? Because I could imagine it's an almost endless pursuit.
Yeah, luckily it's still fascinating me. I'm still interested in making the work. I've got some canvases here in the studio that I'm working on right now, and more ideas, and even sculptural ideas have been coming out. And I've just been writing things down and sketching and taking pictures and making mock-ups and things like that. So it's growing. It's funny, we jammed all this stuff in the gallery. The gallery is packed with this show, and it just keeps coming.
No, that's great. Do you think that because you've talked about this is a sort of you looking back at this point in your life, and I'm curious, I'm assuming that these concepts started during the course of the pandemic, or that's an assumption, but I'm wondering if, because we've had a lot of exhibitions relating to art that was done during the pandemic, and I'm wondering if anything, if that had any influence or effect on the work.
Yeah, certainly. It's an astute observation too, because but I don't know if you know this, Richard, or not, but I was working on a portfolio of drawings that I was calling the Decameron. So I was like thinking about being in a pandemic. There's a, storytelling and kind of dealing with a plague, which is, sort of what the Decameron is about. And I was making all these drawings and creating a portfolio. And while I was making those drawings, I started finding imagery that was more personal, and the drawings started becoming more autobiographical. I shouldn't just say personal, because all my work is personal, but more autobiographical in terms of like history. So memories and certain icons were showing up. Certain things would just come to mind to put in these drawings, like a monster truck, like with the big tires. And it's like, why is this showing up? But it did. And that's where the Space Shuttle Challenger came, the sort of abstract form of that explosion that looks like a snail or some kind of a creature. And if you didn't know the visual of the explosion, you might not know that that's what it is. But that ended up in a few of the Decameron drawings. So I'd finished that at the end of February. And so going into March, I was thinking about, and we had planned the show, and I was thinking, okay, well, what do I want to work on? And I had a couple different ideas, but it just seemed like a natural progression to go from that Decameron drawing portfolio project into this deeper, bigger investigation of sort of what my poet friend Gail Jackson called an autoethnographic visualization.
Well, and I think it's clearly a different body of work than your previous body of work.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah.
So I'd like to open up the discussion, and if anyone has anything they'd like to ask, to unmute themselves and feel free to ask. Someone made an interesting comment about having tons of D-size batteries in their boombox and going through them.
Yeah, actually, it's funny that comes up, because when we did the videos, we had 10 D-size batteries in that boombox, and that thing is heavy. It is heavy.
I remember they were always leaking at a certain point.
Yeah, if you left them in too long. Yeah.
So I don't want to talk about something that you're not comfortable talking about, but early on in the course of our discussions of it, and you were clearly I think I was approaching this totally from my perspective, because I was getting into the images, and I realized that the way that I look back at my past is different than the way that you look back. In other words, you had discussed the concept with us about the two different types of nostalgia, and I feel like it would be useful if you shared that with other people, because it is something that's real.
Yeah, it's not that I'm uncomfortable with it. I think that you and I have had really good conversations about the idea of nostalgia and the definition of nostalgia and what it means to me and what it means to you. And I think it's unavoidable in work like this that there's an element of nostalgia that comes out. But for me, I don't like the word too much, because it makes it sound like and feel like it's something that I'm trying to get back, right? So this idea of longing for the past in nostalgia, I much prefer the word reminiscence, because it's more of a reflection of the past. And there's a psychologist named Svetlana Boym, I think her name is, and she defined nostalgia in two different ways: the restorative nostalgia and the reflective nostalgia. And the restorative nostalgia, I think, can be kind of dangerous, because it's this mindset of like, make it great again, get it back, take it back, let's go back to the good old days, and I really resisted the idea that I was making work that was encouraging the idea of going back to, or like looking fondly on the good old days. Like that didn't resonate with me, and that might be a total Gen X thing, I don't know, like just kind of being sort of bristling at something like that. But not really, because you're a Gen Xer and you like it. So, but then,
Yeah.
so that's restorative. But reflective nostalgia is really just about like acknowledging that time has passed and that you can look at it and just sort of reflect on it. And I think there was a great deal of vulnerability for me making this work. I think looking at some of this stuff that, when you look at sort of lay bare the things that you did as a child, or you kind of you feel a little embarrassed, or I'll speak for myself in general terms, but I felt a little embarrassed about some of the things. So the vulnerability aspect of it made me think about, well, why am I doing it anyways? Like, am I trying to relive something? Is this a like a midlife crisis where I'm like buying a sports car, or like what is this about? And so the idea of nostalgia for me made more sense in kind of a reflective way, and also that's why reminiscence instead of nostalgia resonated a little more.
Well, and I think again it goes back to the unique perspective of what it means to be Generation X, which is really straddling the analog and digital world. I mean, I go across the street to Blue Bottle Cafe and you've got 19-year-old kids wearing digital wristwatches because they don't want to wear an Apple Watch.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't even use an Apple Watch because it's too complicated for me. And do I want to go back to that time of digital wristwatches? No, but it's enjoyable to see someone young enjoying it.
Yeah.
But
and so, Richard, so I'm curious how you feel about, I mean, all this work that you're looking at, you spending all this time in the gallery, and what nostalgic things have come up for you?
Well, I think, well, the most meaningful painting to me is certainly the Challenger one, because I was, I think I was in 6th or 7th grade, but I remember we were watching it on TV and it happened. And that, the pattern of the explosion is sort of imprinted in my mind. But at the same time, I look at a lot of the images, and I guess like the Kermit the Frog one is both, I would say the Kermit the Frog and the Prince are probably, to me, the images that bring up the most vivid parts of my childhood. But the thing that I think that most resonates with me is the MTV pushing of the TV on the cart.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what school was. We had one television, and if you were watching a television, it was rolled into the room. But I see the body of work as actually telling a story about the history of the 80s and 90s, because I think what you're pointing out are a lot of the pivotal events. I mean, the falling of the Berlin Wall was huge, and I spent graduate school in Italy, and when I got to Germany, you could buy pieces of the Berlin Wall, and so I have some of them. I used to walk through the Penn Station in New York when I was taking classes in New York, and I saw those packs of cards for Desert Storm and all the pins you could buy. So I don't know, it's hard. For me, it's like living in my past, but I'm not wanting to go back there.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it actually seems very far away.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what makes the show interesting. And I don't think you're trying to, I don't think it doesn't, nothing in the work speaks to me about, it's more like documenting a past, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And trying to find myself in all of it.
And so Fernando Ricardo has said that the Challenger footage was repeated so often, it did become a part of our collective memory.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's like the 9/11 footage too, with the planes hitting the buildings. It's just
Yeah.
played over and over and over. And it's, I mean, it comes up so quickly on YouTube or on a Google search, the Challenger explosion. Yeah, it's pretty heavy.
So we're getting close to 7 o'clock. I do want to say that Andrew, it's been a pleasure both hearing your talk and having your work at the gallery. I do want to point out that the work is available. People can acquire it and feel free to come in and send inquiries. But also just enjoy the images, and it's nice to be surrounded by beautiful art.
I really appreciate everybody being here tonight, and Richard and everyone at the gallery, thanks for hosting.
Thank you all very much. And we'll have a recording of this available on our YouTube channel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.